The frost came softly, so softly that old Mother Kessa mistook it first for flour carried on the wind from a baker's open shutters. She was hunkered by the alley drain in Flea Bottom, prying a sliver of copper from a rotted hoop with the knife she kept tied to her wrist, and when she looked up the night was drifting white in lazy veils that did not fall, but hung. The air tasted wrong. Even the stink of offal and tannery brine felt muffled, as if some huge hand had clapped the city's mouth. "Snow?" a boy asked, bare feet black as soot, head cocked like a sparrow. "Not here," Kessa told him, though she had seen snow once in her youth on the King's Road, a thin dust that melted as soon as it touched the ground. She blew on her hands. Her breath rose in a pale ribbon and did not fade. The boy's teeth chattered. Somewhere nearby a woman began to sing a lullaby too loudly, as if drowning out a thought. The frost was not snow. It did not melt. It laced itself to the pilings of an overhanging balcony, crept along the gutter's lip like ivy, made every iron nail shine. Along the street of looms a shutter slammed open and a man cursed at the cold that slipped into his bedchamber. His voice was the only warm thing left, and it made a weak circle around itself before the air swallowed it whole. Down at the river, fog swelled off the black water and halted, as a dog might halt before a door, unsure. The black mirror of the water filmed with a thin pall that thickened as it was watched. The harbor bells, hung against storms and raids, did not sway. The ropes stilled, too stiff to move. Above it all the Red Keep crouched on Aegon's high hill, its towers struck flat as coins beneath the livid moon. In the Queen's solar a goblet of wine had begun to vein with ice around the rim. Cersei Lannister set it down and watched the threads grow. Her hand did not tremble. Even the cold could not reproach her into trembling. "What am I looking at?" she asked without turning. Qyburn stood at the window, his hands tucked in his sleeves. "A weather." He smiled in apology for the inadequacy of the word, as if the fault were the language's and not his. "A wind driven down, or drawn. It is not natural. That I know." She crossed to the window. The city lay in an inkwash, street torches dimmed to mere bruises of light. "The scouts. No movement at Winterfell, your grace. Our last raven from Harrenhal turned back, wings stiff with rime. The men there are old, sick, and fewer than they ought to be," Cersei finished. "What of Strickland?" "In good order, outside the walls along the Rosby Road as you commanded. The Golden Company have raised their earthworks and set up pikes against cavalry they do not expect, and scorpions against dragons they do." "Dragons?" The word marked a scar under her tongue. "And the Iron Fleet?" "Euron Greyjoy has made his darlings snug in the Blackwater, hauled in close to the piers as your letter bid. They look like beetles clinging to a log." "Beetles can live through winter," Cersei said. "Men cannot." She turned her profile just enough for Qyburn to see the curve of her smile. "Fetch the pyromancers. Have them count their jars again. And the bells, make certain they're silent. No one rings them without my leave." "As you wish." Qyburn hesitated. "Your Grace, our alchemists say some caches were laid in places where the city is thin. A spark would set the vermin to running," she said. "A kindness." When he had gone, Cersei touched the window pane with the back of her hand. The glass bit. Far below, beyond the city's dim fringe and the blacker dark of the Rosby Road, something moved in the fields. Not torches, not men. A ripple like sand when a wave withdraws. She watched it until her eyes watered and the pain fogged with her breath, and only then did she step back, smiling the way a woman smiles at a riddle she has answered. In the garrison yard of the Gate of the Gods, the gold cloaks were stamping their feet and puffing on their fingers. An officer dragged a cart of sheepskins toward them and barked at them to share. The younger men laughed when their breaths smoked like dragon fire. They laughed less when the fog crept close and listened. Varys found the fog listening. It clung to the alleys in ways that had nothing to do with wind, pushing hoods back and numbing lips until the words of the streets broke apart. A boy whose hair he had once smoothed passed him without recognition, blue-lipped and raw-eyed. "Where do you run?" Varys asked to no one in particular. The cold peeled the question into its separate syllables. To the hill came a voice behind him, and there was a girl with ash on her cheek and a bundle tied with a strip of torn gown. A baby's head peeked out of a second bundle against her breast. The baby's hair had frozen into delicate needles. "We're to the Red Keep," the Queen's men said. "Best chance there." "Best chance," Varys said. "Best chance of what?" The girl looked at him as if he had asked the color of the sea. "Of the Queen." He turned from her and moved uphill. The stones took on a glassy slick. At every corner, candles guttered inside shuttered windows, blue-edged. He had fled hunger, plague, and princes, and none of them had felt like this, as if the air itself had thought, "I'll have you." He reached the base of Visenya's hill and stopped. Here the great September had once thrown its holy shadow. Now only a dish of blackened rubble remained, wet with a sheen like old oil. The night found that place and held it. He could hear the soft sough of frost knitting itself there. On the far side of the ruin, men were gathering beneath the ragged shape of a makeshift shrine. Prayers dripped like tears that froze mid-fall. He remembered then to be afraid. Ravens broke Winterfell's dawn. They came out of the heart of the God's Wood, black streamers slipping between white branches, and Bran watched them as a man watches his own breath, already knowing what shape it makes. The boy in the chair watched the birds, and behind them, through them, he watched the storm cloud dragging a shawl of ice down the long valley of the King's Road. He saw the fields whitening in leaps, not slowly, but as if a great hand were drawing chalk across a slate. He saw bright, thin blue like a blade running under the cloud, and he saw, very far away, a spire and another spire and a curved glimmer that must be the Blackwater. The city, he thought, like he remembered tasting candied nuts in a hot room full of silk. The city. "South," he said when the door opened. Jon Snow ducked into the chamber with Daenerys Targaryen behind him, winter in their hair. The room smelled of wet wool, smoke, and the humble iron scent of the great fire someone had built and banked too high. Jon came to Bran and crouched without ceremony, as a man does for someone he loves. "What do you see?" "Blue," Bran said. He changed his mind. "He is going to the city." "The city?" Daenerys repeated. And for a heartbeat it was not clear whether she meant King's Landing or one of the countless cities that had burned when she was born and kept on burning inside her. She turned to the small lattice window. The day beyond was the color of salt. "He goes around us?" "He does not need us." Bran blinked once. "He needs the most people." Jon stood. "How far?" "Far enough for ravens to freeze if you do not hurry," Bran said, and then, without looking at Daenerys, "He has a dragon, too." The woman's mouth went tight. "So do I." She did not add that one of hers was his. They all knew the count. Sansa came in then, quiet, bearing a cloak over her arm. "He is going south," she said. "So the cooks will boil more broth, and the old women will ask if they should lay out the bones now so they can be found." "Lay out the bones?" Daenerys turned on her, the words harsher than she intended, and then checked herself. "Your people will not die. Not for—" She stopped. "Not for my quarrel," she had been about to say, and here there was no quarrel. There was only the line of blue. Sansa draped the cloak over Jon's shoulders. "I will put men on the walls anyway," she said. "He may yet come to us. He is a storm. Storms change. He won't." Bran's voice was as flat as the ice he had watched take the river. "He is not a storm that wanders. He is a finger pointing." He tilted his head, as if hearing a more distant noise. "He is near the God's eye. He is making old things remember how to move." Jon turned to Daenerys. "We fly." It was not a question. "Rhaegal is not whole," she said. "He can fly. I can fly. The rest we can bring by road." "I can fly," Bran said, a ghost of the old, confused boy in his tone, and then it was gone. "Go now. Take dragonglass. Take what steel you have." He lifted his eyes to Daenerys finally. "When he fails, he does not fail twice in the same way." "He doesn't fail," Sansa said, voice clipped, but it was only fear given good posture. "Jon." "I know," he said gently. and the kindness in the words almost undid her. "Hold the north. Keep the gates open for anyone who comes with a pulse." Sansa nodded. "I will send riders to the river fords. We will be the world's inn if we must." Arya had been in the doorway a while, silent. Her hair tied up under a leather cap, the Valyrian dagger tucked at the small of her back where it kissed her spine when she moved. She did not announce herself. None of them startled at her voice. "I'll go south," she said. The words were as simple as lifting a knife to a whetstone. "The road will be faster for me than for an army. The Hound knows the city's ways." She did not say his name with scorn. She did not say it with anything. "The Hound?" Sansa asked, eyebrows narrowing in a way that made her look very much like their mother for a moment. "Sandor Clegane saved me," Arya said, which ended that. Daenerys made a gesture as if to object, and then stopped. She was learning the limits of command the way one learns the limits of a burnt hand, by not touching the flame twice. "Go," she said. "Bring the dagger," Bran added, a soft rider on the order, as if it didn't matter when it mattered most. "He will be where the chairs are." The chairs. The dew that had si. Lavered the camp's trampled grass did not evaporate under the weak light. It tightened into crystals and began to chime against one another, very faint. Strickland watched two of his men pull shirts over their shirts. He watched the fog come, and the fog stop, and he watched the men stop too, as if the air had turned to thread and wrapped them. "Archers," he said, and the archers came and peered and had nothing to shoot at. There is a kind of quiet that is not absence but the presence of something else. It fell over the Golden Company. They were men used to the way mercenary silence tastes, the silence of a purse counted out, of a plan counted off, of an enemy counting down. This was not that silence. This was the silence of a world that had put its finger to its lips. The first white to break the fog was a boy. His hair had been blonde. His eyes were wrong. Half his scalp had sloughed, leaving the pale curve of his skull like an eggshell. He ran with a gait that implied he did not know his knees. He ran and fell and rose without cover of shame. Behind him came a line, and then two lines, and suddenly there was no ground left because the dead are also a way of seeing, and they changed what ground meant. Strickland drew breath to shout and found his breath stiffen in his chest and snap like a twig. His men loosed, and the arrows took some dead in the throat or eye, and those dead fell, and when they fell the men nearest to them died of hope, which is to say they died not guarding their feet. The fog unrolled like a banner, and under it the corpses kept coming, farmers and septons and a woman with an iron pin through her cheek and one of Strickland's own scouts, frost caked to his beard. The archers fired, stopped firing to warm their fingers, and could not feel their fingers anymore. The lines held because Strickland had made a life of lines. Pikes went down, shields locked. His men were old, but old men are good at not moving. They shoved the first ranks of corpses back and took a step forward, and the corpses cracked and bled little and did not mind. Then the fog lifted its head and something in it screamed, thin as ice scraping stone, and the world chimed like glass struck. The front rank of pikes, 100 oiled shafts, took rhyme in an instant and shattered like sugarcane. The whites folded into the break as water finds a crack. "Back!" Strickland shouted, and then he understood there was nowhere back enough. The city's gates were open. A kindness, they had thought, for men returning from patrol or a messenger gallop. Now the gold cloaks at the gate of the gods stood as if in a painting, staring, and their disappearances were like candles pinched out with a wet finger. Above the gatehouse, the first scorpion, a proud, black beast remounted by Qyburn's design with bronze braces, creaked as men tried to slew it toward a shape too low and too fast for them to track. The shape rose, blue at the mouth, and the scorpion's bowstring grew brittle as spun sugar even as the crew pulled it. One man's hands froze to the winch. The scorpion's arm bowed gracefully, more gracefully than any engineer intended, and snapped, the shattered wood singing like a plucked harp as it went. The river chimed. Viserion slid down the Blackwater's course and swept his mouth along the river like a paintbrush. The water took a skin, then it took a body. The nearest iron-borne ship canted, trapped in instant ice that spread and cracked and then mended itself. Greyjoy's men howled. Their sound ran along the frost like a knife goes along the edge of a plate. Euron Greyjoy, smiling because his face had been cut that way long ago, stood with his coat open and his chest bare and watched the dragon with an expression that was not entirely fear and not entirely lust. His men tightened their grips. Their knuckles went the creamy color of boiled bone. "Closer," he called, which meant something once and meant nothing now. The oars dipped. The river had no patience. A web shot out from the shore and made the narrower channels into nothing at all. A fat barge caught half-turned, crunched and held. Viserion banked. His eye passed over Euron's deck with the incurious sweep with which a storm looks at a tree. The blue came. The rails went to crystal and then to shatterings, and the men who had leaned on them toppled in perfect shapes and broke. Euron kept his feet because some men are so difficult to strike that even blind fate tires of aiming at them. He bared his teeth like a dog and laughed up at the sky as if resolved to flirt with whatever was going to kill him. The bells did not ring. The city swallowed. It took the first dead into itself the way it has always taken armies, unwillingly and without surprise. They poured through the gate of the gods and over the mud gate like floodwater. They found the street of flour and made flour of bones. They climbed. They learned stairs. Their hands, the living might have said in unquiet times, remembered things their bodies had forgotten. The Alchemists' Guild were ready as far as readiness exists for a thing one has never seen. Green glass in green dimness. Leather stoppers waxed until they looked like fat grubs. Wildfire waited. Wisdom stood with lists and wands. Qyburn walked among them like a gardener among exotic vines. "You will not light until I signal," he told them with the humming mildness of a man saying the soup wants salt. "When I say so, you will pour into the drains at the foot of the hill and light there. The sewers know every street. They will carry it faster than any runner. We do not want a pretty bloom. We want a curtain." "What of the city, Lord Hand?" a young Wisdom asked, his voice too thin to disguise the thrill he felt. "What of the poor, of the innocents? What of them?" Qyburn looked at his list and then up at the green jars, smiling as if they had just confessed an old love. "In faith you worry about a mustard stain on a tunic when a man is losing his arm. Do you know how many bodies lie in those cellars down there? Far be it from me to say anything against tradition, but the Silent Sisters have never been ambitious housekeepers. The dead will rise. Would you prefer they do so warm?" He patted the young man's shoulder. "Be proud. You belong to the only fire in this city that knows its own mind." Cersei stood on her balcony and watched blue pour down the street of sisters and freeze the gutters into leaden veins. She could see Strickland's standard buckling at the camp's edge, the elephant that was not there waving its trunk in threadbare gold. A joke finally told. Her fingers ate the chill of the marble railing. She smiled. The smile had nothing to do with joy. It was the smile a duelist wears when he sees the moment when the other man will put his weight wrong on his back foot. "Your Grace," a breathless page said, appearing like a trick of the eye. "They say the small folk, they beg to be brought above. The gates." "Shut the gates," Cersei said. "The bells. Do not ring." He ran. She drank. The wine had grown thick, as if she had let sugared apples stew in it. The cold had found the core of the cup. When she swallowed, it was like swallowing slow knives. Drogon and Rhaegal found the city by titanic breaths of air, each exhale from the sea wind biting with a smell like stone turned wet. Jon rode Rhaegal with the old pain of a man learning what his body can no longer do. Every wing beat reminded him of scars he had not desired to keep. Beside him, Daenerys leaned forward into the flight the way a horsewoman leans to urge her mount. Drogon's body delighted in itself, and she let herself be delighted by that delight, briefly, because otherwise she would remember she was flying toward a place where she had lost her home. They saw Viserion before they saw the Red Keep. A pale wink in the dull sky, a line drawn by a hand inhumanly steady. Jon felt Rhaegal's body recall a pattern older than both of them. He let the dragon choose, which was a coward's courage and the only sort that would serve here. Daenerys did not think, or if she thought, it was the kind of thought that had nothing to do with words. She drove Drogon downward. The air tore past her and wrapped around the city and tried to drag her free of herself. Her hair froze into ropes and knocked at her cheeks. Drogon yawed, mouth opening for a jet of ruddy flame that looked suddenly vulgar and human beside the blue. The flames took and did not take. The blue unmade them where it touched. Stone shrieked where it heated and cooled too quickly. Daenerys tasted a fear she had not expected to taste again. Not of losing herself as she had in Meereen's dark or on the Dothraki Sea when nothing existed beyond the next horizon. But fear for the dragon beneath her, fear of a thing that could take even this from her. She shouted, and the shout blew back into her face like dust. Viserion turned his head. If there was any gaze left in him, anything like recognition, it did not find her. His mouth opened and closed with the careful stupidity of a shark. He was more beautiful than she remembered and less true. He cut past Drogon, their wingtips almost brushing, and she felt the cold trail in the air behind him like fog in her bones. Jon took the other side, Regal skidding the breadth of the city with a tilt of his wings that made soldiers on the walls feel they had been lifted and set down again. Regal howled. The sound went thin at the edges where the cold chewed it, but the sound was there. He struck at Viserion. No craft in it, just the fury of a creature whose world has been disordered, and the two bodies came together in a bone-cracking ram that sent the cold ringing like metal. Daenerys, faster of hand than thought, put Drogon under them and up in the same movement, the way one might put a cloak over a child who is falling. The dragons tore at one another in loops and dropped, climbed and dropped again. Blue bit, red answered. Where the blue struck scale, the scales went dull and then broke free, like river stones in a weak mortar. Where the red struck, frost took it mid-fall and shattered it to a cloud. Even their blood, sprayed across the sky, made odd ornaments. Regal's falling in red threads that froze mid-flight, Viserion's trailing in splinters no color ever claimed. They screamed. Below, the city screamed back with the voices of men and women remembering how small they were. Down! Jon shouted into no ear but the dragon's and his own. He pointed at the northern wall, at a stretch where whites had made stairs out of bodies. There! Regal folded and flung himself at the wall, his claws striking and cleaving old stone like bread crust. Jon felt the impact in his teeth. He let go of the harness with a hand and almost fell, caught himself, felt the harness bite his palm and blessed the bite. He slid, he dropped, he caught a parapet stone with his thigh and turned the pain into falling the rest of the way. He hit the wall walk to cheers that went high and brittle in the cold. Men who had not known they would cheer for him found they did. "Get inside," he bellowed. "Off the wall. Get below ground if you can. Away from their eyes." He swung long claw, and the blade sang its superb, arrogant song, shivering where it met something that should not have been walking and was, breaking it into two something that should not have beens. He moved along the battlement, not careful, not careless, the way a man moves cutting his own hair when there is no one else to do it for him. Daenerys drove Drogon straight at the open mouth of the gate. The sight of her made the gold cloaks hold a moment longer when they might have broken. Fire poured. The dead went up black and bright. Where the fire met the blue that drifted like mist in the archway, there was a sound not unlike a sob, and both colors tore each other into scarves that did not last. She saw a woman with her hands held out empty in a way that meant the woman expected to be filled. She thought of the woman's hands for the length of half a breath, and that was how long Drogon held the gate alone, scouring it clean enough for the living to press their backs into it and slam the bolts. The fog paid no mind to doors. It belonged to another set of laws, found cracks and tasted them. The dead came where stone ended and wood began, where mortar had been poorly mixed, where time had been poor. Arya walked in the dead city like a girl in a temple that had not decided yet if it would take her. She and the hound had ridden to its walls by a back path, the horse's flanks white with salt. The hound's laugh when he saw the black water go hard had been a sound made of disgust at the sky. "Always wanted to see the capital as a cake," he said. "Never fancied eating it." He had left the horse in a burned stable, as if that might make a difference. They moved through the streets in long skirting arcs, keeping to places that had lost cobbles and so lost traction for the dead. Arya had learned the weight of the dagger at her back so well she had learned the weight of its shadow. She did not reach for it now. She did not feel it biting. She felt it waiting. Where? The hound demanded when a tide of dead flowed across the end of a lane. He put his back against a wall. His breath steamed. His scar had gone an odd color, as if it too had taken the frost's word and stopped arguing. Up, Arya said. Her voice broke and mended inside the collar of her jerkin. The Red Keep, where the chairs are. Chairs, the hound said. He spat. It froze before it hit the ground and shattered with a sound like a very small laugh. Aye, sounds like them. They cut across to a stair that wound a slice up the side of Visenya's hill, ancient and narrow and worn into a melt of stone by 100,000 feet. Dead had difficulties with such stairs because dead do not love edges. They gather where the world reminds them of the old rule of falling and cannot decide whether to obey it. Arya went up with a quickness that looked casual. The hound climbed less easily. His left knee had begun to object to cold years ago. By the time they reached a ledge halfway up, Arya could see the roofline of the Red Keep and the open crown of the dragon pit above it like a broken jaw. She could also see the odd dance the cold made with light, how nothing was quite shadow and nothing quite bright. There, she said, and pointed to a narrow gallery that ran behind the map room with the painted floor. She had listened once, half hidden behind a statue, while men in red leather boots and women with skirts that whispered like honest lies stopped to set down goblets there. Servants used that space to move unseen. There are doors. The hound grunted. There's always doors. There's rarely doors and luck together. His eyes cut to the left. And there's him. The last word he poured the way a man pours wine he does not want but knows he will drink. Ser Gregor did not climb the stairs, for all his bulk. He did not need to. He moved along the lower road like a slow boat in a canal, his helm black as a new moon. The dead did not much trouble him because he had been difficult to trouble long before he forgot to be alive. When they rose at his feet, he crushed them with what had been a mace and was now a lump of iron with ambitions. Where they came in a tide too long for crushing, he walked into them and they found themselves pressed into walls or each other and then into nothing at all. The hound looked and did not look away. Go up, he said softly. You don't need me for that. She gave him a quick glance that was better than a smile. No, she agreed. But you'll be there. He spat again and watched it break. Aye. In the Red Keep, the cold took shapes. It found the painted river on the map room floor and ran along the Blackwater stripe, making the blue blaze bright for a blink before the blue went dull. It took the little castles with their pretty banners and made their flags stop where they were. It knocked dust off the tiny Tower of Joy, though no one in the room knew it had a name. Cersei walked into that room and stood with her hands behind her back and looked down at her father's kingdoms. The cold did not dare show itself at her ankles, because she did not look like a woman who would permit a floor to insult her. Qyburn stood to her right. He had brought a pyromancer with him, a man who smelled faintly of pears. The sewers? She asked. Charged, Qyburn said with peculiar tenderness. The men stand ready with their wands. Light nowhere inside the hill, Cersei said. I am not some pyre priest from over the sea, but the lower streets, light them where they not. Light the street of Flower at the mouth of the Hook, and the street of Sisters at the elbow of the hill, and the sally ports below the mud gate. Send the green down like a river that has remembered its true course. And the ships. Cersei's mouth had a curl that might have been a woman's memory of kindness to a man who had made her laugh and might just have been wind moving through an empty house. We will see who the sea favors, she said. The pyromancer fumbled with his wand, which was a mere stick with a wet-looking tip that might have been clay. He murmured to it like a man to a pet. When he touched it to the first of the jars, he smiled the smile Qyburn had smiled. He nodded to his boys. They took the white-faced clay jars that looked like nothing good and popped their stoppers and emptied them into the black mouths of the drains. The smell rose like a song that had learned to walk. A spark, just one, just enough, went down on a rag soaked on purpose for the task and kissed it. The rag took the kiss and visited the drain with it like a shameless ant. Green told the streets what to do. It came in a wall and a sheet and a tide. It found the dead, especially where they were thick, and wrapped them well. Like a husband wraps a bride who is cold, and when it wrapped it also burned. The dead did not mind burning because the dead do not mind, but burning insisted and burned until there was no more to insist with. A woman who had died with her arms around her daughter went to cinders in a single swoop, and the cinders rose and ran like girls freed from chores. A man who had died with his mouth open to shout went to a statue of glass, and then that statue broke. The wildfire did not ask the living whether they preferred to be alive. Took their answer for them in places where it found them. From the balcony, Cersei watched whole neighborhoods turn into curtains. The curtains billowed in no wind. They had their own breath. The cold reeled away from them and came in again like surf. Where blue met green, the world made a sound like glass poured into water. The shock pushed at her chest pleasantly, like laughter she was not sharing with anyone. "Listen," she said to Qyburn, and he listened, smiling like a father at a child who has finally spoken as he hoped. Viserion did not care for wildfire. He drew up above a pillar of green at the end of the street of steel and beat the air with a stiffness that looked briefly like remembered fear. The green licked at him and liked him and could not have him. Its desire for him ate men who had dared to stand near and look up. The dragon banked. Daenerys, eyes streaming from cold and smoke, threw Drogon after him hard enough to make the world tilt. They went up together, and above the city's rim she saw the black bowl of the river, frozen in odd tongues around islands of heat and boat hulls, and she saw something that might have been a ragged flag on a mast but was not. A rack of scorpions had been left on the terrace above the dragon pit. The men who should have tended them were dead or gone. The iron sat, rimed and sulking. Rhaegal, seeing it, remembered what bolts had once done to him. He lowered his head and breathed, and the iron went handsome after all as the frost made its filigree into itself. But bolts did not fly. Daenerys saw Jon in a street below. Black hair snapped into stiff curls by the cold, cutting and backing and cutting again as he herded a rag of small folk up the slope into the lee of a wall where wildfire would not run and the dead would have to climb to find them. He turned his head up once and saw her, and in his face she saw a shape that looked like prayer, not only when a man asks for a thing, but when he gives one. "Hold," she told herself, and the word was a steel nick on her tongue. "Hold." The red keep trembled, whether from wildfire scouring the streets below, or from the enormous bodies grappling above it, or from the sheer wrong weight of the cold on its stones. It shook like a horse under a poor rider. Dust lifted and hung. The map rooms painted sea-cracked. Jaime Lannister had ridden with 2 nights and a day in his bones, and the taste of rain that had frozen on his beard along the Rosby Road, and then thawed as he came down into the city's cold mouth. He had not thought he would come back in this life. He had thought many things. He had been wrong about many things. Crowds had surged around his horse and then broken in odd blooms, as if repelled by pressure they did not understand. He had cut loose of the horse as soon as he dared. He had taken to foot because foot remembered the city better. Long before he saw the city's heart, he saw the city's new blades. Frost spears where gutters spit, ice like blown glass where fountains had been, knives of light and bone in the dead, and the dead themselves. He had not brought a cloak because shame needs cold sometimes to keep it alert. He had brought a sword because he had been born to know the weight of one. Widow's wail hung easily on his left hip. His right shoulder remembered what his missing hand had felt like. It ached with ghost fingers. He saw a girl pass like a thought through a knot of whites and vanish up a stair. He knew her in the back of his mind, the way a man knows the route from his bed to the privy in the dark. Arya Stark, thinner and harder, and not his business and entirely his business because everything was his business now. That was the point of returning, to take responsibilities like a man who understands at last that doors open both ways. He chose a tunnel entrance he remembered from a different life and found it changed in no way that mattered. He put his shoulder to a door he had once ordered shut. He went up a corkscrew of stone, breath burning. He came out into the map room behind the painted Dornish coast just as Cersei turned her head slightly and said, without surprise, "Of course." She had the goblet in her hand again. Her knuckles glowed white around it. He could see the veins on her wrist, a delicate map some man might have once kissed. Qyburn's little smile flicked to him and away. "Brother," Cersei added conversationally, "the city's colder than you are. Warms quickly when you set it alight," Jaime said. She tipped the cup toward the window. "Look," she said, "we have turned it into a sacrament. Fire and ice. It wants us to finish the old song." "Don't," he said. He had not intended to say that word. He had intended something more elaborate. He had intended a speech, had carried phrases in his head like coins to be spent. They tumbled out of his pocket now and rolled under chairs. "Don't do this." Her eyebrows went up. "What is this?" The question was real in a way it had not been when other men and women had asked it. She moved a finger along the itinerary of the trident. "It seems only kind to end the suffering quickly." "Kind," he said. "You do not get to use that word." "Why?" She looked straight into his face. "Because you think it is yours? Because you once kept a city from burning by cutting a man's throat?" "I am not Ares, Jaime. I'm better at it than he was." He took a step. Qyburn moved his sleeve. Jaime stopped. Outside, Omething enormous scraped one tower against another. The floor canted. Green loomed in through the window like a thought overheard. "Qyburn," Jaime said. "Ser Jaime," Qyburn said with polite regret, as if he were correcting the angle of a bone and found the patient flinching. "You are out of season. If you had come earlier, you might have mended something." Cersei sipped and swallowed very carefully. She looked at the table. "Where is father, do you suppose, on this charming little painting? Here or here?" He liked this part, where the roads all come together, as if the world had been designed with his hand in mind. "He's nowhere," Jaime said. He surprised himself by smiling. "There is a freedom in that." Freedom. She tasted the word like a morsel she could not decide whether to spit or swallow. "I had freedom when I pushed a woman down the steps at Casterly Rock because she took my ribbon. Did I tell you that? I did not tell you that. It was a small freedom. This is larger." She lowered the goblet. "The dead are dull, Jaime. Watch them. They have no wit at all. They are an army that an idiot might command. Do you know what a delight it is to face an opponent like that? No Aegon. No Stannis with his rocks. No Mance with his stubborn eyes. Nothing at all, and below me the jars and the boy with the wand and my finger. I will draw a line and it will hold." "And if it crawls up to touch you?" he asked. His tongue felt thick. She blinked once. "Then it will learn to curtsy." The red keep shook again. The painted river cracked across the reach. The wine in Cersei's cup slopped and froze, a membrane quivering but intact. Qyburn cocked his head as if listening to mice in a wall. "Your Grace," he said mildly, "if you mean to light above the mudgate, it should be now." She looked at Jaime. He saw a woman who had learned to marry her own reflection and hate it and keep it anyway. "Now," she said, and Qyburn lifted a hand. He did not have time to lower it. The door on the far side banged open. A boy in piebald leather and half-frozen tears stumbled in. He had lost his hat. His hair stood up in needles of ice. "My lord," he gasped. "They're in the cellars, under the kitchens." They rose. "I was with the sisters." Qyburn's face altered the least degree, like a candle's flame when a breath passes through a room. "So," he said, "perhaps we shall see a clever dead after all." Something moved behind the boy that was not the boy. Cersei stepped back with the easy economy of a dancer pivoting between figures. Jaime drew and did not remember drawing. Widow's wail had a voice that cut the cold's voice and made it flinch. The boy fell with a sound like a sack of wheat being put down. A woman with blue eyes and a singed veil walked in. Her hands were folded. She had been a sister. The memory of this posture had stayed in her body after all else left. Jaime moved. Qyburn did a small neat thing with his sleeves and retreated to a corner like a cat. Cersei did not retreat. She chose a chair and leaned one hip on it and watched. Jaime cut. The cut made a bright line in the air. The woman fell in halves, disappointed not to have been spared. "Under the kitchens?" Cersei asked, and smiled the smile of a woman who would mark an error on a recipe card. "How useful!" Viserion's wing clipped a tower. The tower sent dust outward like pollen and then folded into itself. Stone suddenly uncommitted to being stone. A great weight fell and shook the bones of anyone with bones to shake. In the courtyard below the Hand's tower, the mountain turned his helm with slow inevitability and saw the Hound. The world narrowed, which was a small mercy. Neither man had ever found much comfort in the world's size. "Brother?" the Hound said, syllables half choked by cold. Half by the way a boy's laugh keeps getting caught in a man's throat when he tries to do anything difficult. He pulled steel and wondered why it did not steam. His breath was a banner that would not hang. Ser Gregor lifted his iron. He looked as if he had been built new since the last time they had met, with all the old faults intentionally repeated because a craftsman had liked his mistakes. The dead swirled around his boots and battered themselves to splinters on the idea of him, which was wall enough. They came together the way mountains come together, slow, unstoppable, messy. The Hound's first blow glanced off Ser Gregor's gorget and cracked a chunk of rime loose. It fell and rang. Ser Gregor's return clipped the Hound's shoulder and found bone. They were men who had made a pact long ago without agreeing to it. It would end this way or not end. Wildfire rolled somewhere too near. Green light stitched up the Hound's blade in quick running lines. He laughed because there are only two things to do in front of fire, and he had performed the other one years ago. They slammed into a stair and then down it and then into a wall that had once been painted with flowers. The flowers went to dust. The Hound bared his teeth. So did the mountain. It might have been the same snarl, shared between them like a torn loaf. "Burn," the Hound invited. "Burn for me. Burn like you taught me." A jar, forgotten, jostled, merciful, tilted on its shelf above the kitchen doors and fell and did what jars of wildfire do. Splashed. It loved what it touched. It found the hem of the mountain's cloak and ran up it in a chain of kisses. It reached his visor. It went in. A smell rose that had no name. The mountain, who did not believe in pain, learned something from it for one slow count. He did not scream, but the iron made a sound for him. The Hound laughed and shoved, and they went into the green together, struggling like lovers through a curtain, and the curtain closed. Above them, Arya slipped along the service passage. The cold had made the very cobwebs brittle. They snapped against her cheek with the tiniest tinkling. She reached the slot that looked into the map room and crouched. Her breath made no fog here. The stone had made a decision to be colder than breath. Below, two men were fighting and not fighting. A dance around a woman who leaned her hip on a chair and a man who held his sleeves as if keeping them out of blood. Arya did not watch the woman. She watched the way the long golden man moved his sword, and she saw the way he had taught himself to do with one hand what most men did with two. He was clever enough to make that look slower than it was, as if he were muffling his skill with the thought of apologies. The dead came in and the dead unmade. She felt the tug of them even at a distance, the way a tide pulls at a skiff's rope. And then she felt something else, something that made even that pull seem like a mild tide. It was not a sound. It was the way a silence grows thicker when someone has entered the room. He did not break a door or a wall to come. He was simply now there, as fog is suddenly in a field when you turn and look and have no memory of having seen it approach. He stood at the edge of the painted river and looked down at it and then up. The blue where his eyes should have been did not glow. Simply was. Cersei pushed herself up from the chair and smiled, a cat stepping from one rug onto the next. "You keep a poor court," she said lightly. "Where are your banners? Where is your dwarf? Where is your dog? Where is your woman who repeats your last words?" The Night King looked at her, and now the room's silence took on a shape. Cold leaned against each person, present the way a creditor leans against a debtor's door. Qyburn made a small, intent face, the way a child makes when trying to hear a word underwater. "Come then," Cersei said, and lifted her chin. Her robe fell in stiff folds. "Have you come to bend the knee? You may keep your sword if you like. I bear my throat more beautifully than any woman in this city." She touched it where the pulse had slowed. "I brought a king to heal once with a word, another with a kiss." Her smile widened. "The last one with a knife." Jaime stood between her and the Night King because his feet did not know how not to. He did not think. He did not remember. He took up the idea he had once been and wore it like mail. Widow's wail gleamed like a straight-edged truth. He set the blade's point a fraction forward and breathed through his teeth. "Run," he said without looking at Cersei. "Do you remember when you told me that in the Sept?" she asked softly. "You were better looking then." The Night King took a step. He did not draw a weapon. Snow swirled from nowhere and settled in the room. It lay on the painted mountains like dusting flour. Jaime moved. He made a cut at the wrist because wrists are the place where kings and men are most alike. The blade met nothing. The arm went aside with an economy that made Jaime think of men who were tired of dancing. He did not lose his balance because he had learned not to lose his balance from men who would have killed him for that mistake when he was 15. He reversed. He cut at the knee because kneecaps are honest, and this time the blade kissed something that could be called flesh. A line of frost lifted in the air like a ribbon and drifted to the floor and did not melt. The Night King looked down at it with the mildness of a craftsman seeing a shaving swim off his plane. "Again," Cersei said, and her voice did not tremble. Jaime went in. The arm moved. He went in again. He forced himself to think small, to think of the elbow and the angle and the inch. He had learned a great deal from being halved. He used the lesson. He drove. He would have been a thresher had he been born to it. He worked now like a thresher, steady, unmusical, necessary. The Night King put a hand against his chest. There was no violence in the gesture. It was the gentlest touch Jaime had known since his mother's palm the night he had broken his nose. The cold traveled into him through that touch and had a different character than the air's cold. It had intent. It was the cold of a knife blade that had decided what it would be used for and resented being made to wait. Jaime's heart clenched and did not quite stop. He gasped. The gasped air froze and cut his throat from within. Cersei moved then. She moved as if for a kiss. She put her hand on the Night King's shoulder with the old confidence of a woman who had moved handsome men like chess pieces and ugly men like furniture. "Enough," she said. Her breath whipped into frost between them, making a veil. "You do not know how to treat a guest." The Night King did not look at her. His head turned a fraction only because Jaime forced it to with Widow's wail's motion. The blade had bitten shallow. It made a sound like someone walking far away in snow. The room's frost deepened, and from below came the groan of wildfire finding a pocket of old dry wood. The roar of 1,000 things remembering they were flammable. Qyburn stood very still and thought about corridors. In the gallery, Arya slid the knife from the small of her back. The Valyrian steel took what little light there was and made nothing pretty of it. She blew out, and the breath went forward in a line and froze on the rim of the slot. She set her hand against the stone and felt nothing. She cast her mind down to her knees. She lifted. She dropped. She hit the floor not far from Jaime's shoulder, and the floor took her and stung her feet and left her the gift of balance. The Night King's head came around faster than any human head would have. She had meant to drive the dagger at his throat because throats are universal, but hands remember training better than minds remember plans. And at the last she flicked, she reversed, she dropped and twisted and went for the belly because men keep secrets there, and monsters keep trophies of their secrets there also. He caught her by the throat with his left hand and lifted her easily. Her boots struck nothing. She went lie. T. The dagger fell from her right hand and dropped, and in dropping found her left, which was still her left and still her own. She drove. The blade kissed a cold she had no right to name. For an instant it found nothing, as if cutting into air. Then it met a density like the heart of winter itself, and it slid through, and what it slid through parted rather than broke. The Night King looked down at it and found it interesting the way a mathematician finds an unexpected remainder. He looked up at her, and for the first and last time there was something like a question in the blue. He did not shatter like a child's toy. He came apart quietly, as if she had cut the knot on a sack full of snow that had forgotten it was also bones and intentions. His body grew a crack along the line of the dagger, and then that crack made a tree of smaller cracks. And then those branches breathed out, and the breath of them was cold enough to knell the green flames below for a heartbeat. He went to crystals. They fell. They rang. They melted or they did not. The other things in the room, the dead woman with the folded hands, The man outside the door with a belt around his arm fell too, as if strings that held them had been cut. In the sky, Viserion broke as if some unseen hand had released him from a shape it had been at pains to maintain. He came apart in an elegant collapse, a cathedral finally allowing gravity to make its case. Pieces of him fell sparkling. His cry, which had been a twisted thing, tapered into silence. Regal wheeled free with a lurch that made Jon's stomach try to crawl into his throat. Green still burned. Green would burn until it had burned what it could. Men and women still screamed in the streets. Screaming has its own momentum. The frost thinned. The fog lost its purpose and became merely weather, which is cold's dumb cousin. Where the whites had been, there were merely bodies with the smallness of bodies again. Cersei stood in a room where snow was now only mess and not fate. The dagger stuck out of a patch of frost that would be gone by morning. She blinked. Qyburn made a soft, disappointed noise and then remembered he could make a living off disappointment and put it away. Jaime leaned his shoulders against a carved chair and sat down because his body had decided to be ungenerous after a life of generosity. The cold pulled slowly from his chest. It took a small bitter treasure with it and vanished. He looked at Arya and felt a thank you rise to his mouth like a laugh and did not say it because she would prefer a map to a thanks. "Clever," Cersei said to Arya. She did not clap. "You have a gift for arriving in rooms other people should have kept shut." Arya straightened. She could feel her throat where fingers that were not quite fingers had bruised it, but she did not touch it. "Open doors are invitations," she said. "Only to thieves and assassins," Cersei replied. Arya did not smile. "Then you know who you are talking to, child." Qyburn began. "Don't," Cersei said quietly. She moved to the window. Green wrote poetry in the streets. Beyond it, ice was learning to forget itself. She flung the goblet. It struck the painted trident and cracked. She turned. "What will you do now, little wolf? Kill me? You have some list? I hope I am at the top." Arya's face did not change. "No," she said. "You are where you are." She lifted her chin toward the map where the east was beginning to weep into the west under thaw. "The city is full of people who are not you." Cersei took this in. She nodded once. "Qyburn," she said without turning. "Tell the pyromancers to cap their jars, and send the boy with the bell up to the roof. He may ring it now." "My queen," Qyburn said with a sorrow like the sorrow of a man noting a crack in a mirror he had planned to admire himself in later. "The bells will be difficult to hear. Then he will ring harder," Cersei said. They heard it before the boy reached the rope. Sound travels differently over a city that has been told not to die yet. The first clang was thin, but the second clung, and the third went down the streets and into the cellars and up again like a prayer told to the wrong god and delivered anyway. Men looked up when they heard it. Women loosened their hands on their children's wrists. Somewhere in Flea Bottom, old Mother Kessa crossed herself and did not quite know which way to face. The bells were not for surrender. They were for an end to particular torment. The bells were an inventory of who was left to hear them. Jon stood in a street where fire had decided to be a little less greedy and cold had decided to be a little less imperious. He sagged against a wall and looked down at his hands, which were just hands again, bleeding and shaking in the boring ways hands shake and bleed. Regal circled, less elegantly than he had at dawn. Drogon alit on the red keep's highest tower with a caution he had not known earlier. Daenerys stepped down from him, and for a second her knees went not weak but speculative, as if negotiating with the stone. The city that had expected to burn, then freeze, had done both and lived. It smoked like an insulted cookshop. Esteemed. Stank. People were talking. That was a miracle. Jon found himself smiling down into the collar of his jerkin because talking among the living is a profane prayer that accomplishes what it promises. Arya stepped from the keep's door with the calm of a woman leaving a small market shop where the owner had given her too much change, and she had told him so and he had said keep it. Behind her came Jaime Lannister, looking older and finally in his right costume. He saw Jon and stopped, and the two men looked at one another as if at a mirror that showed only the parts of a face that tell the truth. "King's Landing," Jaime said, "never could resist a gathering." "You tried," Jon said. He meant many things by it. Jaime knew most of them. Daenerys came into the courtyard with he. Her hair rhymed and breaking into straws. She looked at Cersei standing on the stairs, and Cersei looked down at her. The bells made a fifth sound and a sixth and found their pace, their old arrogance. "The city is yours," Cersei said. And the words were the kind a woman says when she has lost a lover and intends to keep the town. "I'm not here for the city," Daenerys said. "I am here for the living." "Lucky them." Cersei's eyes slid to the dragons. "Do your great children know how to take a bow?" "They know how to eat," Daenerys said. It was not a threat. A servant scurried between them, harboring 2 baskets, his head down. When he smelled Daenerys's hair singe in the cold, he coughed and grinned without meaning to. She could have picked him up and kissed him, simply because he grinned. Qyburn moved like a man walking through a memory of his own death. He bent over a sheeted shape that had sprawled in the doorway where the dead had first come up. He lifted the sheet delicately as a lover lifts a chemise. Under it was a boy whose eyes were blue and then were not. Qyburn's mouth pursed. "A kiss to nobody." "We will be civil," Cersei said, more to herself than the courtyard. "We will feed them. We will pay men to pull down what is broken. We will tell the people we always meant to do this. We will blame the different." "The different," Jaime repeated. He laughed once. It sounded like the scrape of a sword across a stone. "You will blame the different and put a crown on the blame." Cersei looked at him with a lack of surprise so pure it was almost art. "What other choice do you see?" Jaime turned. "Tyrion," he said, because his brother appeared at that moment with Davos Seaworth at his shoulder and Varys at his. A pair of men who had no particular love for one another and had learned to be in the same frame for the city's sake. "Here," Tyrion said, a little breathless. "Here, here." He kept saying the word as if it were a spell that held the city upright. He looked up at the red keep and down at the puddles that were already starting to thaw and at the green still chewing a few stubborn corners. "That could have gone worse." "It will," Varys murmured, but softly, as if he were talking about rain. Davos shoved them gently toward a block of shade where the air still hurt the lungs less. "You see how the folk are, milady?" he said to Daenerys, squinting at her. "They'll eat whoever feeds them first. Feeding fest. Friendship comes later, if at all." "I will," she said, and the promise felt like a small bread laid gently on her palm. "Jon, we have stores in the wagons coming south. Winterfell will send," he said. "Sansa will send what she would hide even from herself." "Do not praise your sister to me," Daenerys said. There was no venom in it. Jon gave a small grunt of a laugh and coughed and brought up a string of something not quite blood. Cersei descended 3 steps. "Listen to your knight," she said, meaning Davos. "Do it quickly. We will do the same. It will gall you. That is part of the payment for command." "You will help?" Daenerys asked. Cersei's mouth went to one side. "Help?" she repeated as if reminding herself of a childhood word. "If the city starves, it will not be the cold that kills us later. It will be people. People always end as the danger." She looked at Arya and smiled without humor. "She knows." "I do," Arya said. "Then we will help," Cersei concluded, as if she had been persuaded by someone charming. The bells pulsed. Euron Greyjoy's laugh finally failed. He lay on a slab of ice, one hand flung up, and looked at the sky with the affronted astonishment of a man who believes himself the invention of the gods and has learned there are other interests in the divine mind. He dragged himself up by a rope he had not fastened. He looked across at the city and saw a dragon alight and thought, briefly, of fucking it. Then he thought of running. Then he thought of Cersei. He made his choice among those 3 and found he had chosen none well enough to arrive at the choice. Men and women bent their backs. The living returned to the boring work that makes all miracles into survivals. They dragged bodies to where the ground was cold long enough to keep them separate. They stepped around char where green still licked. The alchemist's guildsmen went pale when they counted their jars and did sums in their heads that had nothing to do with the city's need and everything to do with the guild's old rivalries. Qyburn did what men like Qyburn do, which is to go where it is interesting, then go where it is advantageous, then pretend to be faithful. Cersei sat in the map room, her feet on a line of paint where the neck narrowed, and allowed a seamstress to thaw her hem with a shovel of coals. Jaime stood at the window and watched a woman down in the courtyard lift a dead boy with the tenderness of the living and carry him toward a line of shrouds. He thought of his own son and did not permit himself to say the name, because saying names when they are gone is like drawing coins from a purse you cannot refill. "You will leave," Cersei said without looking at him. "You will go north again. You will talk about honor in rooms where men nod. And then you will come back because you cannot help yourself. They say there is no after," he said. "Perhaps I'd like to see if that's true." "You won't." She set her goblet down and did not drink. "You love this too well." "What is this?" he asked, honestly curious. The moment when the world tries and fails to end. He thought of fathers, thrones, boys with blue eyes, girls with knives. "We're all too stubborn," he said. "You are." She stood. "I must go listen to petitions. A woman's work." She paused in the doorway. "Brother, thank you for drawing his eye." "He was looking at you," Jaime said. She gave him the smallest smile she had always kept back as her gift for him alone. "Yes," she said. "He always does. On the far side of the..." Old Mother Kessa woke in the middle of the second night of their new world, certain she had heard someone call her name. She listened. Daenerys stood in a doorway while the carts rolled in and let the women laying out loaves look at her with their mouths soft. Then she did not make a speech. She was learning. She watched a little girl break her crust into a bowl for an old man with gums too sore to chew, and she felt something like a crown but without its weight. Cersei held court and learned to say the words that held a city together without actually marrying herself to their meaning. She listened to a butcher, a tailor, a woman who claimed to have drowned and come back wrong and wished someone would check. She listened to a former sellsword who asked if he might be allowed to organize the gathering of firewood in the city, because when men do it by themselves, they go to the same place and cut the same boughs and the lanes end up bare as a monk's scalp. She said yes. She listened to Tyrion propose a levy to pay for the wood. She said perhaps. She listened to Jaime tell her she could not make men better by command, and she said watch me, which was old, which was herself, and which did the trick more often than not. The city swallowed. It had learned that bodily motion is its truest prayer. It set to the labor of keeping its blood warm. And beneath it all, at night, when the bells had finally learned a new rhythm and the dragon's sleep breathed like tides against the roofline of the keep, the painted map lay broken in a few places and intact in others, which is any map's fate. If there were dreams, that winter, of blue flames licking along the edges of green and making a color the world had never seen before, if some men woke with their tongues cold as coin in their mouths and some women woke with the taste of ash and winter apples together, no one made a law about it. Varys walked the night stair and found a boy asleep under a tapestry of Aegon's Landing and drew the tapestry down over him like a blanket. Davos untied knots and retied them. Arya replaced a damaged stair plank with her own hands because she knew what it was to misstep. Daenerys stood on the tower and watched the frozen puddles go to water and the water smoke and then clear, and she thought, this is ruling. Jon sat with Bran in a room where the window had cracks in it like rivers and listened to his brother describe a place where snow went on forever and then stopped. At last, because endings are always a kind of later and never a never, the city softened. The green went out. The white withdrew to places where it was temperate and not tyrant. The bells learned themselves again. Cersei walked the length of the map room and did not step on the painted throne, either from superstition or because she had learned one lesson too many to be careless. And when Jaime teased her, she smiled and did not push him from a parapet. On a morning when the river had made up its mind to move, Arya stood on the pier and watched the ships find lanes again among old ice. She had no list in her pocket and no vow on her tongue. The Hound had taught her that sometimes fire changes you and sometimes it is something you walk through and step out of with the same scars you had and a better idea of how to dress them. She had a little sack of dried meat, a skein of water, and the knife. She was looking at the horizon and finding it insufficient. "Where?" Jon asked, because he had come to say goodbye but had not said the word yet. "Anywhere," she said, and then, because the word felt too loose. "West, you'll fall off," he said, because neither of them quite knew anymore whether that was true, and the smile they shared over it was theirs. She turned. "Keep the doors open," she said. "If storms change." He nodded. He was learning how to say little. She walked aboard. The rope went slack. The water accepted. On the wall, the gold cloaks joked about their breath making pipes in the air. In the keep, Qyburn opened a drawer lined with green felt and looked at a row of little bottles that were not wild